Music has always been an integral part of film and, like all aspects of the medium, changed and evolved over time. Beginning in the late 1950s and early 1960s, amidst the emerging cultural fascination with rock and roll, the idea of the compilation soundtrack began to make its way into film. The crossover became more noticeable when the big music stars began to make their own way into the film industry, and by association, so did their music. Think of the Beatles releasing their musical comedy Help, with the soundtrack taken from the pre-existing album of the same name, and Elvis starring in musicals like Blue Hawaii that feature his original songs. This use of popular music in film began to diversify as history went on, with full soundtracks being crafted from pre-existing popular music. While the compilation soundtrack clearly has monetary value, as a single album filled with big hits from a certain genre and/or era would be appealing even to those who haven't viewed the associated film, it also has a deeper effect on the viewing experience of the spectator. This video aims to look at how compilation soundtracks function in a way similar yet inherently different to an original film score. To analyze the use of popular music and its effect on the spectator, I'm going to use films that exclusively use popular music within their soundtracks. That means no scores or original songs, only music that had pre-existed prior to the release of the film. Goodfellas by Martin Scorsese and Dazed and Confused by Richard Linklater are two of the most popular examples of films that use a compilation soundtrack. They both use popular music to indicate aspects such as context, nostalgia, character interiority, cognition, and effective pre-focusing. To start the video off, I want to describe the basic cognitive psychological effects that a song has in a film, but I want to first present what is guiding my research and how I'm analyzing the upcoming films and how I'm comparing the use of an OST to a compilation soundtrack. A quote from Jeff Smith: "The use of music in film serves to 1. Provide a sense of continuity, 2. Reinforce formal and narrative unity, 3. Communicate elements of the setting, 4. Underline the psychological states of characters, and 5. Establish an overall mood or tone." Smith in this chapter is specifically discussing music in regards to film scores, not compilations, but nevertheless, I think this serves as a good basis. I want to specifically focus on the last 3 criteria presented by Smith, as these are what simultaneously connect and divide the work that OSTs and compilation soundtracks do in film. A quote from Plantinga states that films represent characters and events, but also embody or prefigure ways of responding to them. These construals may be unified and cohesive, or they may be ambiguous and even contradictory in valence. In whatever case, it makes sense to think of a narrative film as representing narrative events presented in such a way that they are pre-focused to provide a particular complex of effective experiences. Music, like film, is constructed in a way that implies a proper emotion to the listener. This form of effective pre-focusing is the main similarity between an original film score and a compilation soundtrack, how it has an emotional effect on the viewer. Music is not inherently sad or happy, but it can be recognized as such through the contextual clues the composition of a piece gives to the listener. A quote from Robinson and Hatton: "We do not imply that the music is a genuine expression of emotion in its composer or its performer or its audience. After all, it's often possible for listeners to recognize or perceive that a musical passage is expressive of sadness without feeling that sadness themselves. And notoriously, composers can create works expressive of joy when they themselves are feeling wretched. The so-called doggy theory seems to assume that there is a significant degree of natural resemblance between musical expressive gestures and human gestures that are expressive in real life." A separate quote from Davies: "Music can give rise to an effective reaction that mirrors or echoes its own expressive character. But, and here is the point, those who are saddened by sad music are not sad about or for the music. The music is the perceptual object and cause of the sad reaction. Indeed, the music is the attentional focus of the response, which tracks the expressiveness as it unfolds in the music's progress." This effective pre-focusing that amplifies effective pre-focusing in film lies in the most basic elements of music: tempo, rhythm, harmony, etc., as well as the use of certain musical instruments can all indicate to a spectator what the overall tone or mood of the scene is. The only difference regarding the construction of a song for an OST and a compilation soundtrack is one has lyrics, the other doesn't. For example, songs within both OSTs and compilation soundtracks can feel sad with or without lyrics. Think of the years of messages seen in Interstellar. The music is slow, set in a minor key, which is the key most often used in sad musical compositions. The use of string instruments and an electronic keyboard creates an atmosphere within the song alone that indicates it has a sad connotation that amplifies McConaughey's performance. Also think of the use of Tuesday's Gone in Dazed and Confused. The song, with its mournful use of guitar, piano, and mellotron, gives the listener a feeling of letting go, which in turn is obviously aided by the lyrics. When this is paired with the scene of the students leaving the party, that song's construction bolsters the growing up and end of high school year theme that the narrative holds. While the lyrics of a song can certainly contribute to the scene it's associated with, the association that the song has in the mind of the spectator is what affects how the scene is viewed, especially if it's a popular song. A quote from Jeff Smith: "Yet as many compilation scores show, the lyrics of popular music proffer a kind of double-edged sword. Indeed, they carry a certain potential for distraction, but their referential dimension can also be exploited to speak for characters or comment on a film's action. This referential dimension of popular music is what makes it function in a different way than a traditional film score, using popular music as a bait, so to say, for audiences that recognize the song from various sources, like their childhood or the radio, or even their own personal tastes. Original soundtracks don't carry the same cultural weight that a pre-existing popular song has, since the original soundtrack's creation and influence begin and end with the film it was created for. This is where popular music varies, being able to trigger feelings of nostalgia, or provide context for a film or a scene, or have a spectator form an allegiance with a character due to their shared music taste, all due to the compilation soundtrack's prior standing in pop culture." Lapidus discusses how popular music is used to create and or amplify a scene. Quote, "Rarely is pop music offered to its audience as part of a narrative structure which is redolent of the visual, enigma, quest, resolution. Rather, it forms part of an oral montage. While using music from a certain time period can obviously be indicative of the narrative setting, it can also communicate aspects such as character interiority and, depending on the song, themes that are prevalent to the story. For example, the use of post-punk music in the film Marie Antoinette is clearly not historically accurate to the 18th century setting. The soundtrack contains 1980s artists such as Susie and the Banshees, Gang of Four, The Cure, etc., but it amplifies the themes of youth and issues with consumption-focused cultures, two things that the post-punk movement rebelled against. In addition to using post-punk to capture the spirit of youth, the film also employs period-accurate compositions to capture the actual time period, such as Le Barricade Mystérieuse by Couperin. This mix manages to represent the narrative and character of Marie Antoinette in an explicit and implicit way. The music of Goodfellas functions in a similar way, both explicitly portraying the fact that it is a period piece and implicitly using the contextually accurate music to represent the emotional states of the characters. The narrative of Goodfellas spans about 15 to 20 years of protagonist Henry Hill's life, and therefore, the music that makes up the film's soundtrack are all contemporary to or older than the scene setting it's applied to, audially representing the passage of time within the film's narrative. In addition to the use of music to represent the passage of time, Scorsese uses the soundtrack to convey what's going on in the minds of the characters and set the tone of the scene, which can be inferred through the construction of the musical pieces in the film. Take, for example, the helicopter sequence that takes place during the third act of the film. The scene goes through 6 songs in 10 minutes. The frantic switching between songs conveys the drug-fueled stress and paranoia that Henry is going through orally, by not giving the audience enough time to truly process and recognize a song. The tempos and rapid changing of the songs also indicate a change in the emotion of the scene and Henry's mental state. The usage of multiple songs in this sequence forms the aforementioned oral montage, emphasizing the changes in emotion in the scene. As the songs switch, the spectator can infer the change in Henry's state. The rapid changes in music don't distract the audience from the narrative visual components of the film, rather amplify the urgency of Henry's final day prior to his second arrest. Another quote from Lapidus: "Music is transformational. It changes the emotional state of the audience members more quickly and at a deeper level than the more consciously rooted visual channel." In the same way the use of a single song can influence audience emotions, the rapid switching keeps them on edge in a similar way that the protagonist is in the scene, therefore aligning them with his thoughts and feelings.
Say goodbye.
Stop with those fucking drugs. They're making your mind into mush. You hear me?
Take them back.
The psychedelic guitar and vocals of Magic Bus by The Who plays as Henry almost gets into a car accident, indicating his state of intoxication, paranoia, and how distracted he is by a combination of the two. Since this sequence is altogether 10 minutes long, I'm just going to skip forward a bit.
Jesus Christ, what happened to you? Well, nothing. I just almost got into an accident right now driving over here.
I told him about the accident and I said I was partying all night.
No, I'm fine, Doc.
Come on, get over here.
Doc, I'm fine.
Let me check you out.
The sharp transitions between What Is Life by George Harrison into Mannish Boy by Muddy Waters as Henry does a line of cocaine indicates the change in his mental state and state of intoxication.
You think you come over here and fuck me and leave? Huh?
Come on.
You got someplace better to go?
Don't talk
huh?
like that. Come on. Come on. All right.
Yeah, sure.
Believe me? Huh? Do you believe me? Do you believe me? That's the last one?
Yeah.
Please stop feeding the dog from the table from the plate on top of it. Stop it.
I have to.
You
Remember
don't
the
have
family
to.
here?
I gotta go home.
What do you mean you gotta go home? I've been carrying around this stuff all day. We gotta start taping it to your leg. We gotta go soon.
I gotta go home and get my hat.
Forget your fucking hat. What, are you kidding me? Just what I need now is a trip to Rockaway because you want to get your hat?
I need it. I gotta have it. It's my lucky hat. I never fly without it.
Lois, do you understand what we're involved in here?
I don't care. I need my hat. I won't fly without it.
The more upbeat tune of Jump Into the Fire by Harry Nilsson serves as the base for the scene, playing when a new driving sequence begins, which makes it all the more shocking when the song is abruptly cut off as Henry gets arrested.
Wait, freeze! Don't you move, you motherfucker! I'll blow your brains out! Shut the car off slowly!
For a second, I thought I was dead. But when I heard all the noise, I knew they were cops. Only cops talk that way.
Don't fucking move.
If they had been wise guys, I wouldn't have heard a thing. I would have been dead.
Music is the backbone of youth culture. Think of rock and roll in the 1960s, grunge and rap in the 1990s, nu metal in the 2000s, and so on. Therefore, if music is so tied to youth culture, the best way to tell a story centered around teens is through the use of a popular, contextually appropriate soundtrack. Ticknell focuses on how a compilation soundtrack conjures feelings of nostalgia in the spectator. The centrality of the compilation soundtrack therefore has particular significance when it comes to films which seek to tell or retell events from the just-remembered past of the years since the 1960s and 70s. It's not coincidental that so many soundtrack films depend on nostalgia for much of their emotional impact, nor that the primary moments for such nostalgia are the decades when youth culture was itself young. For a more modern example, Singles centers on a group of young adults living in Seattle at the height of the grunge movement, and the soundtrack reflects that, using the music of the popular bands of the 1990s like Alice in Chains, Soundgarden, Pearl Jam, etc., and some older Seattle artists, Jimi Hendrix, Paul Westerberg of The Replacements, and Nancy Wilson of Heart, etc. It audially communicates how intrinsic music was in the Seattle culture in the 1990s and captures the time period that the film was based on and filmed during. Keeping this quote in mind, let's circle back to the idea of referential dimension. The music within Dazed and Confused amplifies the film's visual aesthetics of the 1970s suburbia, as well as encourages feelings of nostalgia in the spectator through playing some of the big hits from the early half of the decade. The soundtrack features some of the biggest hits from the early 1970s, using the compilation soundtrack to invoke feelings of nostalgia for the spectator and transport them back to that time period through music association, and, for younger audiences, providing context as to what time period the film is set in. Sweet Emotion by Aerosmith is the very first song played in the film and was one of the biggest songs of 1975, the year before the events of the film begin. This usage of the song sets the cultural context of the film's narrative, like hippie culture, the popularity of psychedelic rock and funk, and so on, and amplifies the 1970s aesthetics that the spectator views on screen, like the fashion, the cars, and the drugs. The use of the song is also indicative of the status that the main group of students have in the narrative. They're popular, yet still involved in and friends with those on the outskirts of popularity. In this way, they're much like Aerosmith, being simultaneously a popular band, yet musically tied to psychedelia and counterculture. The music also amplifies the imagery on screen, as audiences watching the film who actually had a high school experience in the 1970s are transported back to that time with the addition of a song that they had likely listened to at that time. So I wanted to take a second to talk about nostalgia in regards to Dazed and Confused. In making the video, I thought that I can talk about nostalgia as logically as possible and in hypotheticals. But I also thought that I could make use of a resource that not a lot of people my age have, which are parents who were actually teenagers in the 1970s. So I sat my mom down, who at the time of the film's setting would be 15 years old, and showed her the first scene of the film and asked her some simple questions about nostalgia and the teen experience shown in the film. So I'm going to show you this, right? And I'm going to mute this. I'm going to mute the music of the intro.
Okay.
Okay. And I want you to tell me that if you think the music helped bring you back to like the 70s, okay? So I'm just going to mute it and watch the intro scene.
Yeah, because you see now watching it without the music, it just looks like you're like eavesdropping almost on people.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? You're just watching them. But with the music, it conjures like even an emotion. Like you're happy, you're reflective, you're nostalgic. Yeah. Whereas just watching them with no music,
you can tell it's the
even
70s.
though you know it's the 70s. Yeah. But I do kind of, like, I mean, if you said to me, you know, put music to the movie, then that's kind of like what I would pick.
Like Sweet Emotion or like something from that time.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Because now you're looking at it and you're saying, oh, look at the clothes, look at the thing. You know, but with the music on, it's bringing back everything. Like, you know what I mean? It brings you back to the time, actually.
Yeah.
The time and the place almost. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I get that.
It really puts you there. Where just watching it is like, oh yeah, I remember that.
A quote from Carl Plantinga: "Thus emotions and affects are elicited in films by pre-focused narratives designed to foster concern-based construals, but are in part enabled and intensified by associations, habits, dispositions, or conditioned responses that suggest either the reasons for the emotion or the emotion itself." In film, of course, such suggestiveness may occur in many ways, through whatever objects, persons, events, or environments that can be represented visually and orally. The costumes, settings, activities, etc. shown in Dazed and Confused are irrefutably 70s inspired and can be visually identified as such. But the addition of 70s music, such as Sweet Emotion or Tuesday's Gone, widens that appeal to both sight and hearing. By using music to represent teenage youth in the 1970s, it triggers memories and provokes emotions that visuals simply cannot do on their own, creating an auditory image that is both amplified by and amplifies the imagery that we see on screen. The examination of compilation soundtracks in film reveals their strengths, providing audiences and narratives with a referential dimension that promotes feelings of nostalgia, as well as communicate aspects such as character interiority, cultural context, and core themes of films. The fusion of music's effective pre-focusing with visuals and narratives influences the emotions and the cognitive processes of the spectator, influencing them to think and feel certain ways, as well as recognize their own pre-existing relationships with music.